Okay, the next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 15136 in the name of Colin Smyth on justice for the Fornethy survivors. The debate will be concluded without any questions being put. Before we start this debate, I would like to make sure that all members participating in the debate are aware that there is an active case relating to the alleged abuse of children within Fornethy House, in which criminal proceedings in the High Court of Judiciary are imminent. For that reason, the sub judice rule is engaged in reference to alleged abuse at Fornethy House will be permitted to give context to the motion, but in the debate, members should focus on the issues covered in the motion itself, the recommendations of the Citizens' Participation and Public Petitions Committee and access to the Redress Scotland scheme, and avoid discussing details of lived experience of abuse or alleged abusers and the upcoming trial. With that, I would invite members who wish to participate to press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Colin Smyth to open the debate. Around 7 minutes, Mr Smyth.
Trust is sacred. Our trust was broken as little girls, and now trust in the system that's supposed to help us and do the right thing by us has been shattered. Presiding Officer, those are the words of the Fornethy survivors. Some of these brave women are with us in the public gallery today. Hundreds more have shared their story. For those unfamiliar with that story, these women, along with thousands of others, were sent to Fornethy as vulnerable wee girls between the 1960s and early 1990s. Fornethy was a sprawling 16th century mansion in the Angus countryside, secluded, surrounded by woodland. One of the small number of schools run by Glasgow Corporation, later Strathclyde Regional Council under its scheme of residential education for disadvantaged children. Most of those girls stayed for 4 to 8 weeks, sometimes more than once, some as young as 5 years old. Sent away to somewhere new, somewhere exciting, a place to rest, to recuperate. I remember getting on a bus with a suitcase. I was going on holiday for the first time. I recall the door opening and seeing a huge staircase. I was so happy and excited, said one survivor. But, Presiding Officer, that excitement quickly turned to fear. Rather than rest and recuperation, many of those wee girls were subjected to appalling abuse. My constituent Marion Reid for Killook is one of those women. I travelled in a black cab to Fornethy from Ridley, where I lived at the time. I was taken in through the big arched door, and as soon as that door closed, my nightmare began. 6 weeks of hell I've carried with me all my life. Those wee girls' hell was concealed, covered up, kept from parents. The children were made to write nice letters home, copied word for word from a blackboard. On leaving that dark place, my older sister was asked to tell my mum what a good girl I'd been. My 5-year-old mind could only feel horror. This was how good girls were treated. Presiding Officer, I've listened to these testimonies. Some shared stories they've never shared with their own families. Well, today I wanted to bring those stories to Parliament to give a voice to those brave women, but I recognise we must respect that ongoing criminal and civil proceedings. So my focus today is on the failures of Glasgow City Council and the Scottish Government to show that same respect to those women. They've been campaigning for 5.5 years against those failures, and they're still waiting for a full and meaningful apology, still waiting even for a meeting with Glasgow City Council, still waiting for access to the redress scheme, still waiting for answers about why the abuse at Fornethy went unchecked for so many years.
Colin Smyth take an intervention.
Yeah, I'm happy to take an intervention. Yeah.
Alice Cole-Hamilton.
I'm very grateful to Colin Smyth for giving way, particularly as, regrettably, I'm required to attend the First Minister's Emergency Summit on Youth Violence. Otherwise, I would have contributed more fully to the debate. But the survivors in the gallery know the love and respect that I have for them, and that Colin and I will never leave their side as we complete this journey towards justice. Colin Smyth and I took the survivors on a trip to Fornethy 2 years ago, and there was much closure in that trip as we walked the grounds of what is now a derelict house. But does he recognise and does he agree with me that they will never fully have closure until their victimhood is recognised, till justice is probably meted out to them, and that they're recognised not just in the chambers here but in the redress schemes that the government has made available to survivors such as them?
Colin Smyth, I can give you the time back.
Can I thank Alex Cole-Hamilton for that intervention and also the support he's given to the Fornethy survivors, including that visit with the women to Fornethy. I have to say it was an incredibly humbling and powerful experience. And Alex Cole-Hamilton is right. It was part of that closure, but now we need Glasgow City Council and the Scottish Government to step up to the mat to really give those women that closure. In September, the leader of Glasgow City Council offered what was a half-hearted apology at the end of a meeting, an item of any other business. The women found out through the media. Senior council officers and the council leader continue to refuse to meet them, continue to refuse a proper, meaningful public apology. Instead, they circle the wagons, they cover up, they prioritise protecting the council over taking responsibility for why their predecessor authority failed to protect those wee girls. And like the council, the Scottish Government has failed to take responsibility, putting barrier after barrier in the way of these women. In January 2023, the First Minister told the Education, Children and Young People Committee that it was possible for Fornethy survivors to be successful under the redress scheme. But then the government told the women their records had been destroyed. There was no evidence they were at Fornethy. That is until the redress scheme itself made clear that personal testimony is evidence. But now the government say they still won't qualify because their care was short-term and involved parents. Presiding officer, those girls were sent to Fornethy by the state, not their parents. They were abused by staff employed by the state, and the state must now take responsibility. Is this government really saying to these women, your abuse was short-term, so it doesn't matter? Are we really going to pit one abuse survivor against another? Is this Parliament really going to ignore the unanimous recommendation of the Citizen Participation and Public Petitions Committee, which called for the redress scheme to be extended when we all know abuse is abuse? Now, I know the redress scheme itself isn't the only thing that matters to these women. Many will never apply. But redress represents something. It represents recognition. The government has chosen the redress scheme to be their formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing, their recognition of the lasting trauma, their acceptance that the state failed the victims of abuse. By denying Fornethy survivors meaningful access to that scheme, the state continues to fail them. Presiding officer, the women want the truth. They want to know why they were sent to Fornethy in the first place. They want to know why no one checked if it was safe. They want to know why no one stopped the abuse year after year. The ongoing public inquiry must get to the bottom of this. But let's be honest, this didn't end with Fornethy. Even today, whistleblowers and victims are too often still met with silence when they raise serious child protection concerns. There's a culture of cover-up in public bodies, more focused on protecting reputations than protecting children. There's a fundamental power imbalance. Public bodies marking their own homework, the unlimited legal and financial resources they unleash against the victims of abuse to defend the state against allegations. Will we consider the Fornethy petition? There's another one before the committee, petition PA 1979. But once again, the government dismiss it. Dismiss its call for an independent national whistleblowing office for children and education services. Dismiss its call for independent investigations into unresolved allegations. Dismiss its call to close gaps in the child abuse inquiry. Whistleblowers ignored, victims ignored, public bodies protected. That's the reality of child protection in Scotland today. Presiding officer, the tragic human cost of child abuse is incalculable. The lost childhoods, the lasting trauma. As a society, nothing should be more important than safeguarding our children. But Fornethy, countless other failures by the state expose the brutal truth. We are failing victims again and again every single day. I began with the words of the Fornethy women. Let me end with some. It only takes one event, one day, to change your worldview forever, and the lasting trauma that brings. Are we not worthy because we were abused only for a short period? I say to the women in the gallery today, you are worthy. You're owed a full and meaningful public apology. You deserve compensation. You deserve the truth. You deserve justice. And I say to Glasgow City Council and the Scottish Government, these women are not going anywhere. They're strong, they're determined. Platitudes and warm words just won't cut it anymore. Deputy First Minister, I want you to see not just the women sit in the public gallery today, but the 5-year-olds, the 6-year-olds, the 7-year-olds, the 8-year-olds, the 9-year-olds, the wee girls who suffered abuse at Fornethy. It's time we did the right thing. It's time to restore their trust. It's time to show every survivor of child abuse they're believed, they're valued, they will be heard. No justice, no peace.
Thank you, Mr Smyth. Just a gentle reminder to those in the public gallery, this is a meeting happening in public rather than a public meeting, so I just discourage you from participating, though I understand the sentiment. We move to the open debate. I call first Fergus Ewing to be followed by Maurice Golden. Around 4 minutes. Mr Ewing.
Presiding Officer, I warmly congratulate Colin Smyth for his dogged pursuit of this issue, and the speech we've heard today is, I think, one of the finest we've heard in this session of Parliament. I'd also commend others across all the main parties, Mr Cole-Hamilton, Mr Golden, Mr Green, and many others who have supported the Fornethy victims on the Petitions Committee and in this chamber. It's a matter of some shame that this debate, frankly, is so poorly attended. It reflects badly on us all. Presiding Officer, you've given a ruling that we can't talk about the abuse inflicted on these innocent girls. I will respect that, but having read through the histories of abuse, having read through the lifelong impacts that that has had on the girls as adults and for the whole of their life, it is plain to me that this Parliament, if it stands for anything, it must redress this injustice. And I hope that we can all unite behind that. But the sad fact is that that truth, that this is a palpable, egregious, serious injustice caused to the most innocent girls in the country over a sustained period of over 30 years, for several weeks at a time, has still not been redressed by either the Glasgow Corporation or the Scottish Government. Now, I think the Scottish Government must take the lead. We must accept the responsibility to do that. How it is done is a mere detail. If it requires legislative reform, that must be done. If it requires an executive direction to redress Scotland, that must be done. We cannot hide behind legalistic arguments. The idea that these children were put there for a holiday or respite care, what an insult. But it's also, as well as an insult, factually wrong. Fornethy is a residential school. The corporation advertised for teachers. What do teachers do? They teach in schools. So that argument is just an insult to the victims. It is platitudinous, pedantic, nitpicking, legalistic, and I don't think one moment that the current Deputy First Minister would seek to invoke or stand behind that argument. The other argument, as Mr Smyth has said, is that they did not cease to be under parental control. Are they really saying that the parents consented to the abuse that their children have suffered? What arrant nonsense. What an absurd argument. The indisputable fact is that these girls were sent there by Glasgow Corporation. Glasgow Corporation owned the school. They are part of the state. The state is responsible for the abuse. The abuse that happened is to young children. Abuse is always unacceptable, but to young children it's despicable. So, Presiding Officer, I'm not convinced that, with respect, that the sub judice law applies here in respect of the ability of the government to provide a solution. It cannot hide behind it. I was going to read from what her predecessor said 2 years ago. They said a solution would be found. That was 2 years ago. Why hasn't a solution been found? This government, conclusion, Presiding Officer, must admit and say, we got it wrong. It takes guts to do that. I believe the Deputy First Minister has guts. All her colleagues are decent human beings. It's time for them to act because, as Marcus Aurelius said, you can also commit injustice by doing nothing.
Thank you, Mr Ewing. I now call on Maurice Golden to be followed by Faisal Chowdhury in 4 minutes. Mr Golden.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Let me begin today by thanking Colin Smyth for bringing forward this debate. It's not the first time he has done so either, and that's to his great credit because he has been a long-standing and tireless campaigner on behalf of the Fornethy survivors. The motion makes clear the horrific experiences those girls suffered at Fornethy, experiences no child should have to endure. And in those circumstances, I can only imagine the trauma of living with that for decades. We can sympathise with them, we can offer them support, but none of us can truly understand what that would be like. As Colin Smyth pointed out, some of the girls, now women, are here today in the gallery, and I want to recognise the courage it took to do that, and also the great courage that they have shown over decades in refusing to be silent and in fighting for their voices to be heard. That said, as the Deputy Presiding Officer has pointed out, as there are live court cases, care must be taken to ensure that discussion is only in the context of the motion before us. Therefore, the language I use and the issues I raise should be viewed through that prism. It certainly hasn't been easy for survivors. In March 2024, the former Deputy First Minister, Shona Robeson, pointed to an absence of official records of the girls' time at Fornethy. I struggle to understand how this is possible. Who is responsible for this? I hope we can all agree it wasn't the responsibility of the children. Then there's Scotland's redress scheme, a mechanism to help survivors of abuse, but which has been closed to the survivors of Fornethy. Closed to them because it doesn't cover abuse during short-term residential stays. I understand the scheme wasn't set up to deal with abuse in short-term care, but as the Public Petitions Committee has recommended, the Scottish Government should consult on expanding it to include short-term institutions like Fornethy. Now, I know the Scottish Government has previously refused to expand the scheme's criteria, but I think the public would find it outrageous that compensation was being declined because, in effect, the victims didn't stay in a place of abuse and cruelty long enough. For me, one instance is one too many and will have ramifications for the rest of that child's life. Ms Robeson appeared to suggest at committee that expanding the scheme would set a precedent which would lead to many more cases, hence the reason why restrictions were put in place. My view is that all victims of abuse should have access to redress no matter the length of time they received it, and regardless of how historic it was. Those roadblocks to restitution, whether it be missing records, unanswered questions or lack of compensation, all will sadly help to keep old wounds open. These women should expect our current institutions to allow them access to natural justice in addition to formal legal proceedings. Let's remember, those girls were sent to Fornethy by the State, Glasgow Corporation as it was then and later Strathclyde Regional Council. Those institutions had a duty of care, a long-established legal and indeed moral obligation. It is a matter for the courts, as well as, in my view, the redress scheme to determine the validity of the harrowing, horrific stories of abuse I have heard. But let's make sure the women in the gallery and all those who couldn't be here today know that we are with them, that we will listen to them, and that we will speak up for them.
Thank you, Mr Golden. I now call Faisal Chowdhury to be followed by Maggie Chapman, around 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I join members in congratulating my colleague Colin Smyth on bringing this issue to the Chamber once again, and pay tribute to him for his long-standing campaigning for the Fornethy survivors. I also join members in welcoming survivors and campaigners watching in the gallery today, and praise their bravery and resolve. I have sat on the Citizen Participation and Public Petition Committee since 2023, where we considered the petition calling for the Fornethy survivors to have access to Scotland redress scheme. The committee does not often come to strong, united conclusion on petitions. But in this case, we have directly recommended to the Scottish Government that the redress scheme be widened to allow those who experience abuse to Fornethy access to the scheme. We have concluded that an injustice has occurred and current legislation is not fit for purpose in this case. But to be clear, seeking redress is not about money. No amount of money can undo what these women went through, or the lifelong consequences of the abuse. In considering evidences, we heard three major reasons why Fornethy survivors would not be eligible under the redress scheme. The redress scheme only covering abuse in long-term care, the lack of detailed records available, and the claim that children were sent to Fornethy with parental consent. But let's be clear, these children were in the care of the state. They were sent to Fornethy at the recommendation of the state, through teachers or medical staff employed by Glasgow Corporation. Therefore, it is the responsibility of the state to step up and offer meaningful redress to those affected. It should not be matter how long a person was abused to get recognition of the pain that has been caused. There is no time limit for trauma. One parental consent submitted evidence, including allegations children were told what to write home to their parents and could not contact them freely. That is hardly informed parental consent. On record, we hear from Redress Scotland they take a presumption of truth and work on the balance of probabilities when considering cases, meaning detailed records should not be a barrier to change. The committee recommended that the Scottish Government consult on extending redress. If we believe survivors, which I'm sure all members do, we should be at least considering what more we can do to support them. Presiding Officer, I again pay tribute to the brave campaigners who are here today, who have not stopped fighting for recognition of the abuse they endure. But paying tribute means nothing if we do not offer redress and change to ensure this never happens again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Chowdhury. I now call Maggie Chapman to be followed by Monica Lennon. Ms Chapman, around 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I thank Colin Smyth for lodging his motion and securing this debate, and for his very powerful and moving opening speech. I concur with every single word. I am so immensely grateful too to the Fornethy survivors for their determination in their fight for justice. It is right that we recognise and commend that courage and perseverance today, although they should never have been put in that position that they have had to fight. This should shame us all. But I do thank them, and I'm sorry I cannot join in person this afternoon. I'm grateful too to the Citizen Participation and Public Petitions Committee for their sensitive discussions on the petition submitted by the Fornethy survivors. That petition begins, and I quote, "Survivors need acknowledgement, closure, and compensation." I believe it is right that we voice those words today, because those words reflect 3 time dimensions of the process. First, acknowledgement of the past. Fornethy survivors experienced harm, not as objects, but as children, as young people, as human beings. I think Redress Scotland's presumption of truth is important here. We do all, I'm sure, empathise with the stories told by survivors, children being taken from their homes in the city to a strange place, separated from their homes, separated from their parents, their families, for long weeks, with no way of reaching them, possibly with no way of knowing when their ordeal would end. We've heard survivors tell their stories of the types of harm they experienced, of the losses which they bore, losses of childhood, of joy, of safety, of the power imbalances which not only affected them as children, but their parents and families who experienced little or no choice in the decision to send their little girls away. And of course, we've heard about the responsibility for that harm. Who should bear that responsibility, both the individual and institutional responsibility? We should acknowledge that past, however uncomfortable it may be for us. Second, the petition seeks closure in the present. Closure through having the experiences that those women recognised, that those experiences recognised appropriately, through obtaining answers to their questions, through apology, an apology that is full, precise and unstinting, through assurances that, so far as is humanly possible, this wrong will never recur. And third, the petition calls for compensation to go into the future, as recognition of the reality of loss, as acknowledgement of responsibility, and seeds of future growth and flourishing. Trauma-informed practice is not enough without trauma-informed policy. I very much appreciate the Petitions Committee work. It has worked exactly as it should have done, responding to concerns, investigating the situation, making practical and feasible recommendations for action. And as Faisal Chowdhury has just said, there is no time limit on trauma. So it is time for the Scottish Government to act on those recommendations from the committee. The 2021 Redress for Survivors Act, as Thomson's solicitors have pointed out, was based on principles of dignity, respect, and compassion. The associated regulations turned out not to be consistent with those principles, not to consider the longer-term issues that are at stake here. That was a mistake, but it's a mistake that can and must be rectified. We must ensure that Redress Scotland is given what it needs to deliver, as Colin Smyth said, justice, to provide justice for the Fornethy survivors. Because this isn't about process, this is about justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. And I call the final speaker in the open debate, Monica Lennon, in around 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to take part in the debate, and I congratulate and commend my colleague Colin Smyth for securing this debate and for uniting members. And I've listened to the debate so far, and I'm pleased that we are speaking with one voice. I want to also pay tribute to the Citizens Participation and Public Petitions Committee, because I know that they have taken this cause to their hearts. They've listened to the women, they've listened to the evidence, and they've made really important recommendations to the Scottish Government. And I was surprised to hear that we hadn't seen the action that everyone is fighting so hard for. I'll take the intervention from Fergus Ewing.
Fergus Ewing.
Well, thanks to Monica Lennon, who's almost like a sort of extra member of the committee, so frequent are her appearances to stand up for various interests and constituents. But my question is this. Is it not a matter of shame that the Scottish Government have failed to act on the unanimous recommendations of the Petitions Committee, representing, as it does, all the main parties? And is it not about time that, if the Government won't act, that one of the major parties bring forward a proper debate with a vote at the end, so that, just as we saw in Flamingo Land, the Government will be forced, if they're not willing to do it themselves, be forced to do the right thing?
Monica Lennon, and give you the time back.
I'm grateful to Fergus Ewing for the important points that he makes. I mean, it's not just a matter of does it shame the Scottish Government, it shames Scotland that we're not doing the right thing by the survivors, so we should leave no stone unturned. It's good that we have a members' debate today, thanks to Colin Smyth's efforts, but this should be debated in the chamber again, in government time perhaps, or opposition time, but this can't be the last word. But it is good between the efforts of the convener Jackson Carlow, Maurice Golden here today, Faisal Chowdhury and of course Fergus Ewing, and we've heard from Maggie Chapman. There are many members across the chamber who do care. I know we have some limitations in what we can say today, and time is always short in a members' debate. I just wanted to speak briefly today just to again demonstrate my solidarity with the Fornethy women. I knew nothing about Fornethy House or about the survivors until a chance encounter outside the Scottish Parliament back in March 2022. I was walking on by, I was there to meet with other campaigners, and I was approached by some of the women, and they asked me and my researcher, "Are you MSPs?" And we stopped to chat, and it was a chance encounter. And I was able to refer some of the women, given the links to Colin Smyth's region, including Marion Reid, to Colin Smyth and my friend and colleague Lindsay Hamilton, who is on maternity leave, or she would have been here to support the women in the gallery today. But I think it speaks to the words that Fergus Ewing said in his final remarks in his speech about doing nothing is not an option. So for me, that was a lesson in not being a bystander. And I have, although I'm a regular visitor to the committee and other campaigns, I have watched other colleagues take this one forward, including Martin Whitfield. I know there's been dozens of parliamentary questions. There's been involvement at the highest level, including the Deputy First Minister. And I know Kate Forbes to be a good person with a good heart. I know she'll be listening very, very carefully and will do everything she can to make sure that all these barriers that are apparently in the way, that we can knock them down together. So, Presiding Officer, grateful to you for giving me that little bit of time back. But this is about the pursuit of truth, about justice. I hear what colleagues say about the redress scheme, and not everyone will want to pursue that, but it's important that is there for those who want to pursue that. I know that many of the women have had to use a lot of their own money to pay for therapeutic interventions, including therapy. The impact it's had, the lasting trauma, and everyone's journey will be different, but that should be acknowledged. In this Parliament before, we have united to say sorry to those affected by historic forced adoption, for example, and I was grateful to the former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon for listening to my calls on that and to work cross-party. It says to me that this is another issue where we have to unite and we have to come together, and I know that the Deputy First Minister will do everything that she can. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Lennon. And I call Kate Forbes to respond to the debate. Deputy First Minister, around 7 minutes, please.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and thanks to Colin Smyth for lodging this in motion and for his tireless work in supporting the Fornethy survivors. A huge welcome to Fornethy survivors in the gallery today. I know from having engaged with many of you directly that you have shown remarkable courage. And it's an element of frustration, far be it from me to criticise or be seen to be criticising in any way processes. but it is a matter of quite significant frustration that due to the live criminal proceedings in relation to Fornethy House, there are limits on what I can say. One of the agreements that I made with survivors when we first met was for regular meetings and regular engagement. And sadly, under quite clear legal advice, I've been unable to meet again with the group for that reason. We've been talking today about the pursuit of justice, and I don't want to do anything that may prejudice or compromise a live criminal case that would be totally at odds with my desire to see justice. I'll happily take intervention from Fergus Hume.
Fergus Hume.
I'm grateful to the Deputy First Minister for giving way. I note what she says in relation to the sub judice rule, but the sub judice rules in relation to a criminal case due to be heard in the High Court in September. If nothing happens until after that case is over, nothing will happen in this session of Parliament. And in any event, it is not the case, is it not correctly the case, for Deputy First Minister, that these current legal proceedings may prevent us from discussing aspects here today, but what they don't do, and what they cannot do actually, is fetter the powers of the government to bring forward a solution. And therefore, you cannot, with respect, Deputy First Minister, hide behind this sub judice rule.
Always through the chair. Deputy First Minister.
There's absolutely no hiding going on, because I'm about to outline some of the actions that I took directly in response to the 5 actions that survivors asked me to progress with, and I'll go through in detail. There are some which I'm afraid any fair-minded person can see. Some of those actions are fettered as a result of the criminal proceedings, and I think most members understand what those are. I did commit to continuing close engagement with survivors, because whilst I have the greatest of respect for my colleagues across the chamber, bluntly, I put more emphasis on what survivors ask me to do than I do necessarily on representatives. And I know Colin Smyth has sat in on the meetings that I have had with survivors and has heard directly what they wished me to do, and that has been my agenda. There has been some suggestions that government is in any way unmoved by the necessity of protecting or acknowledging young girls at harm. And whilst I know it wasn't suggested that necessarily would be my approach, can I just absolutely emphasise that not only as a mother of a little girl, but also as somebody who engages with many, many survivors in my role currently, I do not need to be persuaded to care about these matters of injustice. And I would hope that every member hears that comment loudly and clearly. During the first meeting I had with Fornethy survivors, I committed to taking forward a number of actions, and I wanted to provide Parliament with an update on those actions. The first was to engage directly with Glasgow City Council. The second was to look at how we could provide greater levels of emotional support, for the very reason that Monica Lennon outlined, where often that responsibility for offering emotional support fell on survivors themselves. And the other was to see whether the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry would consider Fornethy itself. And that's because of the comment that somebody else made, that this is not just a question around justice, it is also a question around truth, pursuing truth and understanding what the truth is. Now, on those actions, firstly, some survivors told me that the most important outcome for them is an apology, and particularly an apology from Glasgow City Council. I contacted Glasgow City Council, spoke to the leader directly, and Colin Smyth has outlined the fact that an apology was made, and I don't argue with his characterisation necessarily, because that's how survivors felt. I also then subsequently wrote to Glasgow City Council to invite them to attend a meeting with myself and Fornethy Survivors Group. Now, that invitation has not been taken up on that occasion, but I would still encourage Glasgow City Council to meet with the survivors at the earliest opportunity upon conclusion of the relevant criminal and civil proceedings. The other action was in pursuit of the truth that survivors wanted to see dedicated evidence from the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry. And so I welcome the announcement of Phase 10 of the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, which does focus on children's residential care establishments operated by local authorities, including Fornethy House. And whilst I know some survivors have already given evidence to the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, this will be a specific hearing on Fornethy, and the public hearings for Phase 10 of the inquiry will commence later this year. Now, the other two actions of the 5 are still pending. One of them is to follow up in a meeting with survivors, which I am extremely keen to do without compromising the criminal proceedings. That is hugely important for the reasons that I outlined earlier, which is that, bluntly, I am more interested in what survivors have to say and the actions that survivors want me to take than necessarily their representatives in this chamber. And secondly, a question around redress. Now, I am not going to go over the commentary in and around the formal Scottish redress scheme. I think it was Maggie Chapman that talked more generally about compensation. Now, the Scottish Parliament voted for the criteria, which is under debate. This has nothing to do with how long or how dreadful the abuse was. And it is an area that I have said already to survivors in a private meeting, and which I'm happy to say again today. These are issues that I want to pursue and proceed with. But the criteria that we have right now in place for the redress scheme was agreed to by Parliament, and I know that I have written to the committee subsequent to the first letter, which said that we weren't going to reopen the criteria, to explain some of the challenges with reopening the criteria. So I hear members' calls for redress and for compensation. The process to do that has to be watertight and has to actually deliver what survivors are looking for, which is why I take my steer from them. So as I draw to a close, having tried to be as candid as possible in my remarks, whilst also recognising and respecting the court and not wanting to compromise that, I've laid out the 5 actions that survivors asked me to take, the progress on those actions, and the only actions which we have been unable to proceed with, which are a minority of actions, are those actions that cut across the live criminal proceedings. I am very happy to re-engage with survivors at the earliest opportunity and will continue to engage with members across the chamber. As I conclude, I reiterate my commitment to ensuring that we pursue truth and that we pursue justice for all survivors of abuse. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister. That concludes the debate, and I suspend this meeting of Parliament until 2:30.